Welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello and welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with experienced property tax attorney Nora Devine. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and I'm excited to talk about Illinois taxes today. Nora, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
All right, so today we're going to navigate some commercial property tax laws and talk about what owners need to know. So aside, in comparison to what we already talked about with residential, how are commercial property taxes assessed in Illinois?
Everything is supposed to be assessed based on its fair market value. And it can be complicated to put a value on different assets in the commercial property realm, because sometimes the market is small for certain types of assets, and sometimes there's unusual market activity in certain asset classes too. So the assessors have a difficult job to try to figure out what it all means and what the property tax should be. So generally, what somebody's willing to pay for an income producing property is usually tied pretty closely to what kind of net revenue that asset produces. So if you have a multi-tenant building, whether it's an office building, a retail building, an industrial building, you're going to look at the income and expenses of that building, look at the net revenue of that building, and you're going to think, okay, if I'm an investor in the marketplace and I'm looking for an income producing asset, what would I be willing to pay in order to acquire this asset? So the assessors are trying to kind of get into the mind of the prospective buyers or the buyers in the marketplace, or they should be trying to. That can be tricky because sometimes you have people that are not typically motivated, that are overpaying for certain asset types for reasons that, only the people could tell you that are making the decisions. We have real estate investment trusts right now paying really high numbers for certain residential multifamily buildings. And so the assessors kind of have to figure out what it means when they see these sales. Should they increase the value all the way up to that sale price, or are they going to frustrate the entire income stream for that asset if that's the new tax position after the transaction closes? So it's definitely more nuanced, it's more complicated, and there's a lot of room for interpretation depending on which jurisdiction you're in.
With the way that retail has been going down for a while, and obviously office has gone down significantly since COVID. How do property tax rates and assessments vary between different types of these commercial properties? And has it changed a lot due to these things that I just talked about?
I think we've seen the values fluctuate greatly in the office sector. We've seen, the office sector was doing well before COVID, and then now the vacancy rates are up and everyone's wondering what it means. You have a lot of talk and a lot of action going on. As a matter of fact, downtown Chicago to take some larger office properties and convert them to a residential use. So what it means for the assessments is, there are still some strong sales of buildings that are highly occupied and that have strong tenants in them. So you look at those sales, but they contrast starkly from some of the other sales you could also look at. You can also look at some other highly distressed, very low sales. And so, of course, every office owner in the loop is going to say, well, I want to be assessed, like with these low sales. And of course, the assessor's saying, no, those sales don't apply to you. Like, let's look at these high sales over here, these buildings that maybe had better occupancy, these buildings that may have had stronger tenants, and these buildings that may have been more improved or better maintained. So there's a lot of room for interpretation and argument, which is where the attorneys come in. So the attorneys come in to argue, no, the value's not that high, the value's lower. Look at these sales, look at the actual property's condition. And then it becomes a battle of the expert at the highest level. The taxpayer is going to hire an appraiser, hopefully a good appraiser that really knows the office market. And then the government at the end of the road, whether it's in court or whether it's a property tax appeal board, is probably going to hire their own appraiser. Then the argument becomes just a battle of experts at that point.
How did local government policies and zoning regulations help in determining property tax assessments for commercial properties?
Zoning has a very large impact on what somebody will pay for a property. I represented a property in Lake County that was, for whatever reason, zoned residential, but it was actually on a major street. And all the properties across the street and up and down the street were all commercial. But they kept this zoned as residential because the village wanted to have, iron fist control over what use went into that space. And so everybody who wanted to buy the property, they made the offer to buy the property contingent upon achieving a zoning change. And about the third prospective buyer that couldn't get their zoning changed. I mean, the owner of the property was getting very frustrated. It's like, this is obviously supposed to be a commercial property. You won't give anyone a zoning change. Okay, they didn't want a dispensary. Can't fault them for that. But what about the vet clinic that wanted to go in? And in the county or the municipality said, no, you'd have to relocate too many oak trees. So we're not going to let you do that. So at this point, the assessment went up and I took a look at it on behalf of the taxpayer, and they were using market data on commercial sales to justify a kind of enormous property tax increase. And so this went to a full-blown hearing, and it was just like, how do you do this? Like, how do you restrict the zoning to residential, making it very hard to sell, but at the same time you want to maximally tax it as commercial.
That's commercial. Yeah.
And you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, that's not legal. They can't do that, right?
Well, they weren't able to do it in that case.
You're like, I beat them down.
So they shouldn't do it. That's for sure. It's very unfair about it. But yes, the zoning matters a lot in what a prospective buyer will pay for a property. They'll pay more for it if it has more liberal zoning and if the zoning is higher density. So if you can build a 20-floor building, you're willing to pay a certain amount for the land. If you can build a 2-story building, well, you're willing to pay a very different price for the land, obviously.
So tell me about the property tax extension limitation law, how it affects commercial properties. Is this different from how it affects residential properties?
No, generally the property tax extension limitation law is something that's supposed to hold down the levy. So the levy is the amount of money that the taxing district is asking for from the property tax. So for the local school district in, let's say, anywhere in Illinois, except for Chicago or Cook County, let's say outside of Cook County, then, they say, okay, we need $1 million to run the school. And we need 95% of that money to come from the property tax. So their levy is going to be 95% of $1 million. And the tax rate is going to be whatever the tax rate needs to be in order to make that district whole with whatever it levied. And when you look at your tax bill, there's multiple different line items. There's multiple, sometimes 6, sometimes 10, sometimes more. And it's things like elementary school district, high school district, park district, township. It's municipality, it's the county, it's the local community college, and they all have a levy on your bill, and it all adds up to what your total tax bill is. And so the PTELL is supposed to hold those property taxes to basically not more than 105% of what they were the year before. Okay. And that applies to residential and commercial. The one wrinkle that's interesting for commercial is that recently there was a change to the legislation that basically it now allows the taxing districts to levy over a PTAB reduction. So in other words, if you were a large commercial property and you appealed your property taxes to the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board or to the circuit court, and it resulted in a sizable refund, before the school district would be in a very tough situation to try to pay that refund out, because they can't levy more than 105% of what they levied the year before. So you saw a lot of convoluted settlement issues where they would make deep reductions to future tax liability in order to avoid being in that awful position of writing a huge refund check that would cause problems for the operational budget of the school. So they did change the legislation a few years ago. So now if there is a sizable PTAB refund for a commercial property, the taxing district can levy over that, similar to the way that they could get around the limitation for new property. In our last episode, we were talking about how if a new subdivision comes online and has a bunch of new kids, it's not fair to hold the school district to 105% of what they asked for last year, because now they have an increased burden. Well, it's similar to that. It allows like a hole to be poked in PTELL, as I would describe it. So therefore, if there is a big PTAB refund related to a commercial property, they can now levy over that refund amount.
Okay. And you mentioned briefly said something about the appealing, if someone appeals a commercial property assessment. How do you appeal a commercial property tax assessment?
Well, many commercial properties are held in title by a corporation. So you usually need to have an attorney on your side at the Board of Review as well as at the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board. In some jurisdictions, you can bring in, the income statements, 3 years of income statements and the rent roll, and bring in some vacancy history and some affidavits regarding not only what has been vacant, what has been occupied, but also what efforts have there been to lease the vacant property up. So usually they want to hear about that. They want to understand what's going on with this property. Why is the vacancy rate higher than the market usual, the market norm that's in this area? And so you can kind of go in and you can get a lot of assessing officials to kind of do an income approach to value for you with the actual income statements from the property. And that's if you have a sophisticated assessor who has a significant amount of commercial tax base in their jurisdiction, and they've been educated on what the income approach is and how it works. However, there's 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and there's maybe 1,200 assessing officials between township assessors, board of review members, and supervisors of assessments. That's just by my own back of the napkin estimation based on, the demographics and things. And, most of them don't have a lot of commercial tax base in their jurisdiction. So it really does vary widely in terms of how sophisticated an assessor may be about looking at an income approach to value on a property. And in those places where there's not a lot of commercial value, what they'll do is they'll use a software system called Marshall and Swift or something similar, which is a software system that's designed to find the value of a property based on the construction costs or the replacement value. Like, what would this cost to build new? And then how old is the thing? And figure out, okay, it's this old, then it has this much depreciation. And then if it's some kind of use that nobody wants anymore, then there's further depreciation there, not related to the age, but related to what they call external obsolescence. So you may go to a jurisdiction and try to talk to them about a property value on a commercial property. And the assessor may just say, well, I ran this into Marshall Swift and this is what it would cost to rebuild it. So this is how I'm going to assess it. But as we discussed in the case of that, huge house, cost does not always equal value. And that's particularly true in commercial properties.
Right.
You can have big box properties that depreciate down to nothing but land value within 10 years, like some of these larger retailer buildings that are 100,000 square feet or so. The data shows that 10 years after they're built, they're selling to a new user for similar value of what the vacant land would sell for. Yeah, so if you're looking at a Marshall Swift printout of what it would cost to build the thing, if you have some depreciation number other than 100% and the thing's 10 years old, then you're probably missing something as an assessor. And so that's why there's three approaches to value. There's the cost approach, there's the income approach, and then there's the sales approach. So if there is data on that asset type in that asset in that geographical area, you can then look to the market approach to value, which would be an analysis of what similar properties have sold for on the open market. And then what an appraiser does, and I tend to lean toward getting appraisals when possible, because I think an adversarial legal system works so much better when you have an advocate and you have an expert. So the advocate would be me, and the expert would be somebody who's a member of the Appraisal Institute who, has highly, highly sophisticated knowledge of appraisal techniques and asset types and multiple jurisdictions. So for me, I lean heavily on appraisers with, when there's a lot at stake, it's for me, it feels very not risky, but incomplete to kind of walk in there with income statements and then say that I know what they mean. And it's like, I do know what they mean. But when the rubber hits the road and you're really going to get into an adversarial legal proceeding against this assessing official regarding the value of this property, you are going to be in a stronger position as an attorney if you have a qualified expert and a fully documented report. So, I do like to get appraisers when we are moving into a more formal, hearing type of a situation.
How much do changes in the commercial real estate market impact property tax assessments? Well,
if we have big reductions to office buildings, which we should have, I think this assessment cycle, then what happens is the tax burden gets shifted over to the residential, because the Chicago Public Schools are going to get whatever they asked for. If they ask for whatever they asked from the property tax, they're going to be made whole on that ask. And it's just a matter of who's going to pay it. So if the aggregate equalized assessed value goes down on the commercial side, well, then, it just means that the tax rate goes up. And if the tax rate adjusts upward, then that means that every other property class in the county is going to be paying an increased tax dollar amount. Mm-hmm. So it's a burden shift is what it is.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for some people that are not, the residential people that are having to shoulder that burden.
Conversely, when things are going gangbusters with, the commercial property and retail's doing well and offices doing well, and you've got industrial properties going up every which way, and they're all assessed high and they're doing well, then it puts downward pressure on the tax rate.
Right.
And that's a benefit to the residences. So yeah, you do want that strong commercial tax base. You don't want commercial property users leaving your jurisdiction, because that is when you start having the runaway tax rate. That's
Right.
what happened in the southwest suburbs. All the businesses went right over the state line to Indiana to experience a more advantageous tax climate. And what happens? Well, when the values go down on all the commercial users, the property taxes will increase on the residential users. So, I mean, you've got a very intense property tax burden in some of those areas down there by the Indiana state line.
Yeah, I actually knew people who moved their business to Indiana, and I think even one that moved to Wisconsin, and just to get some relief. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting when I talk to a room full of assessors at the same time. I always love to know like who lives on a state line, because they're the ones that are getting the details from their constituents about how the grass is greener on the other side.
Yep.
Well, my taxes would be lower if I were across the state line in Missouri, or if I was across the state line in Iowa, or if I was across the state line in Wisconsin. And these assessors have learned, how things are taxed on the other side of the state line. And they'll fire back, well, but in Missouri, they're going to tax your dog. No personal property is taxed in Illinois. They abolished it in like 1976, but there's a lot of states that still tax personal property. Sure. And they tax services, and they tax retirement income, and they tax, the registration of your car, and maybe they have more heavily tax the roads, or they heavily tax something that Illinois is not heavily taxing. So
it'll even itself out. Yeah. What's tips or strategies do you have for owners of commercial properties to effectively manage and maybe minimize their property tax liabilities?
The number one thing is to talk to a property tax attorney before you make an offer on a property that you want to buy. Okay. There's a lot of things that can be done up front in terms of real estate tax planning. Sometimes you're really buying an existing business, or you're buying an inventory of personal property, and you should not fill out the form to say, yes, this whole purchase price was just real estate, because, the assessor's going to say, oh, here it is. They wrote it right here. They said the whole thing's real estate. And so if you have that conversation up front with somebody who knows what they're doing, they can advise you how to make an allocation and how to explain that better to the assessing officials, that no, not this whole purchase was real estate. Some of it was business value. Some of it was inventory. Some of it was something else. So that's one thing. And then also, the timing of your transactions can matter. There's a 3-year tax cycle in Cook County. And, if you close your sale after the township is published and the sale is much higher than what the assessor's value is, it's possible, based on the way that the cycle unfolds, that you may have that advantageous lower assessment in place for the entire tax cycle. And then it may not be revisited until the first year of the next 3-year tax cycle. So sometimes the timing of the transaction can matter, whether you can make a business allocation can matter. And then also just getting that really hardcore projection from somebody like me. Get somebody like me to tell you what your worst case scenario is. Because, if the deal doesn't make any sense at your new tax position under the worst case scenario, then the deal doesn't make sense. It's not worth the risk. The sales do get chased. The tax liability will get, increased to an amount that's commensurate with what you paid. And so just getting that upfront look and getting advice, what your worst case scenario is, because when that sale is recorded, it will matter and it will have impact on how your tax bill could change.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you for that. And I'm sure any potential property owners in Illinois, thank you for that as well. Well, thanks for tuning in to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with experienced property tax attorney Nora Devine. For more information or to connect with Nora, you can visit thedevinelawgroup.com. And be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments. Nora, always great to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.